Target 2 for us is obviously we want to get a national eBIF-based campaign going with participating MSOs before the end of the year. So think of like a first half of the year target and a second half of the year target before we get to the end of '09. And that would be eBIF-based, that would be national, would be with participating MSOs, because obviously without the MSO eBIF footprint, there is no campaign. We're looking at 2 initial templates. And I know that previous panel, they're absolutely right. We'd love to do things that are a little bit more sophisticated, but we're talking about trying to get scale. So we are going to take a template-based approach on the eBIF side.
And who's making the template?
Canoe is making the template. So what, Muggs?
So the MSOs use, a lot of the MSOs use Visible World and their local data.
Mm-hmm.
So where do they fit into the plans for the programmers?
Let me just repeat the question. The question was, a lot of the MSOs use Visible World for local. So how does that body of work fit into your body of work?
So two answers there. One is that we are not dictating to the MSOs in that first product how and what they do and what they're using with regards to their insertion capabilities or the techniques. So yes, definitely the folks who already are using Visible World as part of that, as part of their ad insertion system, I'm sure that they will use it. De facto, if you're using C-Change equipment, if you're working with Visible World, if you're using Aris, it's all going to be utilized for this first one. Again, it's part of the, it's going back, Muggs, to the issue of below the line and above the line. We're not dictating to the MSOs who they work with and what they do below the line.
But you're saying you want to do an eBIF application on an ad nationally this year with the participating MSOs, which to me means I'm watching an ad, something clickable comes on the screen, and I either click it or I don't.
Right.
So where does the trigger get put in?
The intent is the trigger is put in by the national broadcaster for these first ads.
So the programmer?
Yeah.
That means also that all the only ads tagged right now are the local available SCP-35. That means the national programmers can start tagging their files, start stop points, all the local available. And we have a lot of discussions with the programmers in the willingness to start identifying their available.
We've started, yeah, and now we're back on the CAM, on the community addressable product question that Tom Morgan asked. And for those who didn't hear that, you probably did, asking about is Canoe already talking with programmers about tagging correctly for moving us down the path really towards household addressability is really the issue, right? But beginning with zone-based addressability, the answer is yes. If you're a programmer and you're sitting there and said, wait, we haven't been talked to yet, that's part of the reason why we want to start giving general guidance. We have started talking specifically with some of the early programmers who we want to do some of the tests and the soft launches with. We haven't announced who those networks or programmers are. We anticipate doing that this spring. And that's just the starting point. Obviously, Canoe would be in business to try to work with everyone. But yes, we've started having those discussions, Tom. And no, it's not as hard as pushing a rope. But what helps is actually putting a business model in place.
All right, so sometime this year you make a template and you give it to who? I mean,
okay, now we're back to eBIF.
Right, your second priority for the year.
All right, so we create a template. The first, and during this process, we're actually working with, it's a collaborative effort between 3 parties, right? There's Canoe, there are the MSOs, and then there are the initial set of programmers/networks. Again, we've just started to approach on the eBIF side. We have nothing to announce at this point, but assume that we have to start off with at least a handful of programmers/networks. So moving together, what we really are doing is creating the eBIF template is the easiest part, quite frankly. Making sure that we get to ORT, to operational readiness testing end to end on all of this, and being able to collect this locally at each MSO's head-end aggregation server, getting this centrally back into the Canoe aggregation server, making sure that that gets routed back and into our CAS, or Common Advanced Advertising System platform for actual reporting and invoicing, and getting that back up through the data channels to the programmers to report pre, in, and post-flight. That's the hard part, right? And that's what the work is going to be. We've just started, actually, all the way through to probably Q4 of this year. Does that answer the question?
Yeah. And what else?
And what else? All right,
We're
that's
talking
not
about your
enough.
priorities for this year. Oh,
Yeah, we're going to solve world hunger too.
what did you say,
What
Rebecca? What do the templates do is the question.
Well, the first one I think you saw because you were, we had some collaborative work around vote and poll. That was what we tested initially as Project Canoe, and we came up with some of the first specifications. What we are starting to do, we haven't actually started the templates yet, is it will be the next one is around RFI, around a simple request for information, and this would be placed on a spot. All right? Because we know that there's a difference between RFI on programming versus RFI on a spot. And we want to do crawl, walk, run with regards to this. Remember, our target here is scale, which means that even though you will look at it and say, that looks brain dead freaking simple and not really cool, is it? I think the coolness lies in actually making this thing work across millions of households in a coordinated campaign first. This first one won't.
Yeah,
Telescoping. The
asking
question
for
was,
request for information.
will the RFI include telescoping? The intent is that on our roadmap, yes, we want to include telescoping at some point. But again, crawl, walk, run. And also, we know that telescoping as a capability, say telescoping from a spot to either a hierarchical set of on-demand stream options, or in some cases, telescoping straight to a video asset to play. That capability already exists with some, if not most, of the participating MSOs. So that's why it is on the roadmap. But again, what we're talking about is coordinating this from a business fashion as well. Right? So think of it this way. I think, Rebecca, is that everything that we've all been talking about in trying to test and trial, or have been testing and trialing, really for the last 15 years, everybody wants to put that and has put that on Canoe's roadmap. Our job at Canoe is to try to put that in a doable roadmap in partnership with you, with programmers and networks, and with the MSO platforms, and we have to do this incrementally, quite frankly. So the third thing, to this point of what the target is.
Well, let's hold on, because it seemed like there was a lot of questions when we went through your little bit of work you have to do this year. Were there other questions about this notion of EBIF RFIs on advertising this year?
Some of the RFI work with what kind of information would the consumer actually get? Is it somebody email or somebody email to them? What do you...
We're going to take the simplest route first. So I think when we've got all of this finalized, because part of it is going to be also with the initial advertisers through the programmers that we'd be working with, then we'll have most of the detail. But I think as a design principle, Jeff, the key thing to just think about is if there's an easier, simpler path right now that gets us on the scale side and that also from a logistical perspective makes the most sense, we will more than likely take that. Right? We don't want to complicate ourselves, even if it's not the coolest thing to do. And that also obviously applies to things like SLAs, the kinds of parameters that will go into service level agreements. But remember, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do here is create a viable environment for actual business models that will generate revenue. Right? So we also understand that we've got to play within expectations of people, of advertisers who are looking at what they currently do with DR, with direct response and direct mail. It has to be something that provides value and is competitive, right, to existing DR kinds of ad spends. It can't just be cool, right, or a science fair project. Now can I answer the third thing? Okay.
Just going back into this one where you talk about addressability, like in the long run, as an advertiser, could I do like in these 10 zones, I want to do like household income greater than 100K, and in other households, like in other zones, I'm splitting the zones based on income group and those kind of things. So can I define these parameters in these applications, and all the market data you are overlaying will all be options, basically? This is one option we told off. So
yeah, that's a good question. The question that was asked for those in the background is really the issue of multiple variants, all right, across the ad zones. Because what I just described as our initial product really introduces just a single variant, right, household income. The question here was, looking at all of those 2,400 plus ad zones, could we introduce multiple variants from a programmer and therefore an advertiser's perspective to say, hey, I want to target, in one campaign, I want to target household income, But then I also want to target, say, college age, and then I want to introduce a third demographic or psychographic segment. I want to do it for my campaign, and let's make it even more interesting. I want to do it in that avail. Right? So that Thursday at 8:15, I now send out not just one national ad and one variant ad. I'm sending out one national default and say 2 or 3. All right? And the answer is yes. That's part of the roadmap for what we want to do. But again, it's not as much limited by, well, two things that we have to work on. One is obviously the capabilities in terms of insertion capabilities at the zone level and these kinds of additional variants for our MSO partners. That will introduce some new complexities. We're going to talk about increasing the amount of assets that have to be stored and played. We still want to, and to Tom Morgan's point too, making things easier, we have to really get to SCT35 more widespread and more accepted. And that's not just below the line, that's SCT35 being tagged by programmers and then being incorporated by companies like SeaChange, Strata, and Aris with regards to their scheduling and also the T&B and yada, yada, yada to get there. I think we're on the path to that. So that's one. But the other one, too, is essentially as well the business behind it and the ability to purchase it and to buy it. I mean, if we were suddenly to wave a magic wand and tomorrow we had household-level addressability with infinite variants, ready to sell, people would flip, all right, and not in a good way. Can you sell that way? All right? I don't know if you walked into an agency and saw the usually entry-level person who's sitting there actually doing the buying on behalf of a P&G, right? And it's set, it's wrote, you've got this, you've got additional price, you've got a set rate card. I know a lot of people here know a lot more than me. I've just been learning this in the last 2 years. But what we would essentially do is, by introducing that kind of capability, we'd be doing things like fragmenting inventory, right? How do you sell that? How do you price that? How are you going to report on it? With that kind of addressability, you suddenly have the opportunity to rate differently and price differently for the different kinds of data models that are coming back on this. Well, what's more valuable? Where is the hierarchy of value? Right now, you pay based on Nielsen and Nielsen ratings. That's the currency. Well, we're introducing at least 2, if not 3 new currencies in that scenario. Who's putting that together? Where do we get buy-in? Right? Where's the leverage to get that accepted as part of that process? So that's why I go back to saying collectively we have to make this market. And we have to do it in incremental steps whether we like it or not. Right? And so a lot of this always seems to go back as well to the data. It's 2 things. It's from a attribute perspective, what are we able to sell now on top of the linear 30-second spot? And what are we then able to report on or measure in terms of the effectiveness of that? I think those are the key sort of market level challenges that we have. Building the CAS platform in the center, doing the EBIF templates, doing the ORTs with 6+ MSOs and and a ton of programmers and networks. That's actually easier compared to making this market, right?